So you've made some assets and now you want to show them off like a pro. Well, here's how. First, let's clear the light out of our scene, and then under View, we can lock our camera to the view and line up our shot. Next, we're going to need some more collections. Make sure you've selected the scene collection and then add 5 more. Then we can rename these. We're going to rename them to Mesh, Metal, Matte, Color, Wireframe, and Environment. Now we have to add more view layers as well, one for each collection. Then under each view layer, we can uncheck the layers, leaving only the corresponding layer checked. The only exception for this will be the wireframe, which will also need the mesh layer. Moving into the render layer, we can switch from EV to cycles, and then under film, we can turn on transparency. This will affect every layer. Then we can switch render layers to the environment render layer, and under lights, we can turn on environment. This option will only affect the active layer. Hopping down tabs to the World tab, under Surface, click this little yellow dot, and then select Environment Texture. Now I'm going to look up the location of Blender's built-in HDRIs. They should be under where you store your Blender file, your engine version, then the data file, Studio Lights, World. I'll be using the Studio's HDRI. After that's in the Mesh View layer and Collection, add a new empty and rename it to Mesh Rote. And then we can set an end frame. I want this to render at 24 frames per second, and I want it to be 4 seconds long. So we can set our end frame to 24 times 4, and that'll give me 96 frames. Moving in 6 frames, I'll add a keyframe to the Mesh Rote's Z rotation. Then I'll add another one at frame 30, and I'll rotate this 360 degrees. Then I'll jump forward another 6 frames, adding the keyframe. Then jump 24 frames forward again, keyframe. Then lastly, move 6 more frames forward, keyframe it. And then for the last jump, 24 more frames, and rotate that to 720 degrees. After we have that, we can make a copy and rename it to Camera Rot. And remove the first 3 keyframes and the last 3 keyframes, leaving only the middle 2. And we can set these to 0 and 360 on their Z-axes, remembering to replace the keyframes. And then we can parent our camera to this, and voila! Next is our metal collection. Start with a sphere and shade smooth it. And give it a new material, calling it metal. Also rename the sphere to metal and make sure it is in your metal collection and you're on your metal render layer. Now we can set the metallic to 1 and the roughness to 0. And if we look at this in the material view, we should have this shiny sphere. Now to make the matte one. So jump into our matte view layer and add a new sphere to our matte collection and rename it. Give it a material, calling it matte, set its roughness to 1 and its color to a mid-grey. Now for our color layer. We can add a plane and rotate it 90 degrees on the X, and then we can set its scale to 1.4 on the X as well. Then we can add a new material and set it to an image texture. This will be our ACE color ref, and you can find it linked below if you want it. Now under Object Constraints, add a track to and set the target to camera. This will allow our colors to always face the camera. Next for the wireframe, we need a new material called Wireframe. Then in the wireframe view layer, under overrides, we can set the material override to this wireframe. The override tab won't be here unless you are in cycles. Now to set up the material, in the shader editor, add a mix node, and our factor will be the wireframe node. Please note that this will show your mesh as triangulated. Now set the A to a white and the B to black. Now we can just change the wireframe node size to something that you're happy with. Now with that done, we can start our render. For now, set the samples to something low, for me they'll be 52, and render the image. This will render out each layer. The environment layer will be blank. You just need to change it from combined to environment. Moving forward, we're going to need to be in the compositing tab, and make sure that you have use nodes checked. Then copy the render layer. We're going to need 6 of them, one for each of the render views that we've made earlier. Let's add a viewer node so we can see what's happening here. And then add a alpha over. Plug our environment's render layer environment plug into A and then our mesh into B, keeping the factor at 1. Then add a second alpha over, merging the wireframe and the mesh. We want wireframe in the A and the mesh in the B. And then we can go to frame 60 and we can set the factor to 1. And then at frame 66, we can set it to 0. Now we can add 3 more alpha overs and blend the last 3 images into our render layer. The render layer should be in the B path, and the previous alpha over should go into the A path. Then in between the render layers and the alpha overs, we're going to need a transform node. You can use V and Alt V to zoom in and out on our background so we can see more. Now I'm going to set my scale to 0.4, then the X to -800 and the Y to -400. Then copy the transformation node and plug it into the next render layer, setting the X to -600, and then do the same for the last one as well, this time setting the X to -300. Now here's what we should have. Now if we render this, we can see our final composite. Now you should note, when I was moving the metal layer, I went too far over and it got cut off. That's because when merging two layers, the top layer will always act as the bounding box. So nothing can go outside its boundings. That's why when we merge the metal layer, matte and color, we merge them into the background and not each other. Now that's done, if you want to replace your cube with your own asset, just import it and under Object Constraints, add a copy rotation, setting the target to your mesh rot, and then you're good to go. But with this, we're done. So thank you for watching and don't forget to like and subscribe.